Hello and welcome to episode number 29 of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Today is Sunday, December 21st, 2014. I'm Melissa Agnes, and this podcast is brought to you by Agnes Day. Let's talk crisis intelligence. Hello, Chris, Tim, and Lou. Welcome to the show. I guess let's start with Captain Chris Hsiung. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, Melissa, and hello, everybody out there listening. My name is Chris Hsiung. I'm a captain with the Mountain View Police Department. We are located out here in Silicon Valley. I've been with our department for 20 years, and I'm currently in charge of the patrol division, as well as providing management and strategic oversight of our digital media communications.
Awesome. And then we have Mr. Tim Burrows.
Thanks, Melissa, and hello to everybody that's listening. I am Tim Burrows, a retired sergeant from Toronto Police after 25 years. Now I reside in the beautiful state of Florida, where I enjoy sunshine and long walks on the beach. And I am a consultant and a strategist for law enforcement using social media and communications.
And you just had an awesome, successful, first of many, I hope, online conference for law enforcement on social media.
Yes, we did. The hashtag LESM conference. And I can very happily say that everybody that's taken part in this was a big part of the success of that conference. So thank you, Chris and Lou and Melissa.
Cool. Okay, and then we have Mr. Lou Hayes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lou Hayes. I'm a police officer in Metro Chicago. I've been there for 17 years. For the last 15 years, I've been teaching use of force. I started out as a firearm instructor and kind of morphed into understanding constitutional case law and the strategy side. That's where we were really missing and falling on our face in police training. So I take some of the experiences of being on the SWAT team and in the crisis intervention roles and kind of spread the message and try to engage those in my community about a lot of what's going on.
Awesome. And you guys, all three of you actually have already been guests on the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. I'm really glad to have you back, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're about to have because I think that it's a really, really important one. I think it's very timely, and or I know it's very timely, and I think that listeners, no matter what side of law enforcement, whether they are law enforcement or work for some sort of government agency or aren't. I think that everybody will find this conversation interesting, I hope, anyways. So we're here to talk about, and I think that this team, this group of the three of you, really nicely complement each other and to contribute to this conversation. So we're here to talk about everything that's going on right now in the United States, a little bit in Canada. We're starting to see a little bit more and more, unfortunately, but really taking place in the United States since Ferguson. All of the divide between community and police officers and police agencies across America. So I wanted to talk about what you guys are seeing from your side of things, because we hear so much from the people and what they're seeing or what they think they're seeing, and all of these misconceptions and the sensationalization from the media. So I really want to hear your perspective. I want to hear what's going on as much as you can and are willing to share on your side. So how you guys are looking at from each of your perspectives. Lou, what you're seeing on the streets. Chris, what you're doing within Mountain View PD to kind of get ahead of this stuff, because you guys are a strong, strong leader in building trust, building communities, or building community within your community, using social media, all that stuff. And Tim, what you're doing with the different agencies for which you work across the state. So huge intro, but if anybody'd like to start, let's just kind of get this conversation rolling, because I think that I hopefully will leave my goal. I'll say this: my goal is to leave here with two things: to help people get a better perspective and understanding of what's going on the other side of what we're really, really seeing online and offline and in the media. And then also I have a lot of government agencies and police agencies that listen in, as well as PIOs and different crisis and emergency managers that listen in to this podcast. So for those who don't really know where to start, or who don't just know what the next step should be, I'm hoping that this conversation will really help get them in that right direction and help them feel a little bit more confident towards taking those next steps. So with that said, I don't know who wants to start, or how do you want to start the conversation?
Melissa, this is Lou. I'll start it.
Great.
Well, one is I'm going to talk about what I'm hearing on the street from people. I'm a patrol officer, and one of the specialties that I have is as a crisis intervention officer. It means that I respond to those with mental illness. So a lot of the criticism of the police is involving those that have a mental issue, or a developmental issue, or a disability. And the way that the police have traditionally responded to persons in crisis are very sadly similar to those of how we respond to people that are resisting criminals. And that's really a poor way to look at it. So we're getting beat up for a lack of training, a lack of awareness of those. And it's, to me, it's a valid argument that they bring. So when you see so many of the issues of the mentally ill and how the police are responding to it, and you throw that with a little bit of a mix with the criminal element that gone bad, it's really the intersection of so many issues at once.
It is, and so go ahead.
No, so it's my opportunity to talk to a lot of either those in crisis, or the advocates, or parents, or family members, or friends of people in emotional, developmental, mental crisis, to talk about some of the challenges that we face. And it's really the same challenges that we face with dealing with the criminal element. So that's one thing that I see on the street. But then when I travel around and do use of force classes, I get an opportunity to talk to the officers, and it's really challenging conversations to get them to see the point that those in crisis and some of the criminal elements have against us. And I sympathize with some of those complaints of policing. So officers have a really difficult time of explaining themselves in the why they're doing what they're doing and how they're doing it. So I get torn between both sides on this. It's so challenging to be an insider and to question the things that we've been doing in policing. It's met with a lot of resistance on the inside, but it requires a lot of courageous conversations among supervisors and administrators and people with influence inside the agencies to take a look at these things and say, we do have some valid complaints on how we police. Let's look at this beyond just the law.
I love those points. Before I add in or chime in with some questions, Chris, did you want to add something as captain of Mountain View PD?
Sure. The other day I dropped into our patrol briefing, and this topic obviously came up. And in our area, we have an officer in a neighboring agency who was tweeting some frustrations on their own personal account. But when they tie a nexus in and they start talking about their job as a police officer, it's really gotten him into a lot of hot water. So what was voiced among the patrol officers was, what do we do, and what can we say or not say? And it's important to we try to provide some guidance from the management side and say, look, talk about if you do choose to post anything on your personal social media, it's gotta, it's a record. Nothing is private, and make it positive instead of, bashing or getting into a debate. Talk about the positive things that cops do. And that kind of leads into, the overall strategy of police departments need to remember is really to demystify the job that we do, the equipment we wear, the tactics we use. And this is nothing new. 20 years ago, when community policing first came on board, the mantra was get out of the patrol car, shake hands, get to meet your residents, get to meet your business owners. And what was that? That was demystifying the job that we do. And you form partnerships, and people begin to see officers for who they are on a first name basis, as opposed to just seeing a uniform. And where social media comes in is the same exact thing. We will never replace getting out of the car to make those partnerships, but social media provides yet another channel to really just talk to, listen to the community's concerns, talk back to them, keep an ongoing dialogue, and that forms a relationship that your community will learn and grow to appreciate. Obviously, it's harder if you're starting this in the midst of a crisis. I would always say that, if you're not going through a crisis, now is the time to really just reach out and have those conversations on social media with your community, because if the day does come that you need to just really go through some crisis or whatever, those relationships will pay off in spades.
It's such a profound advice that everybody should be taking. But I would like to add that, or I would want to add that, every police agency right now can consider themselves, in my opinion, in crisis. May not be facing it right now themselves in different parts of the U.S., but as a whole, police officers, police agencies, you're struggling against a reputation that just continues to plummet because of all of this that we're seeing and all of sensationalism and everything that's just happening online and off. So now is absolutely the time to start putting those strategies into practice. And Chris, when you said that, it's time to get out of the car, one of the strategies needs to be to get out of the car and meet the residents, meet the community, to build those relationships. Lou, that made me think of, the conversation that we had on the podcast that you and I recorded together, and how you feel like how did you put it, walking the beat, like a 1950s police officer or something like that.
Yeah, with my call box key and my baton, I'm twirling it around, walking the alley.
Yeah, because it's one of the strategies that you personally, as a police officer, put into place. And I mean, just in that other podcast that we recorded, you talked about how profoundly that has helped not just your own personal reputation, but you get to know the community you're working with, how they're viewing things, what they think that are issues within the community that maybe your police agency isn't seeing or just isn't putting or flagging as a priority. So there's so many great, and it's the little actions every day. It's not necessarily taking on a big task and coming up with this mega campaign. It's taking the small actions every day to reach out, to say hello, whether that's online or offline, to share a story, to humanize the people behind the badge. Tim, I believe that you don't like that.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the term humanize, and it's strictly, and I'll be quite frank, it's strictly just semantics. I get what people are saying with that. I just like to look at it as we need to be more relatable. The police are the public are the police. We have to show that we really are the public as much as we are the police. And Melissa, you might have brought up a really good point that right now, policing as an industry is in crisis. And I think if we go back pre-Ferguson, pre-hashtag Black Lives Matter, policing had been for some time, they'd been in a situation where they had an issue that they weren't addressing. And that was really the marginalization of minority groups, new immigrants to the country that really didn't have a trust factor with the police. And the relationship is so strained with a lot of these communities to begin with. And when you start to look at the two polar opposites, there's the people that love the police no matter what, and the people that hate the police no matter what. And there's a big, giant gap in between. And as you approach both ends of the polar opposites, you have influence that you can put onto people. And what's happened now, because the issues were never really addressed strongly enough, is it has been given the opportunity to morph into a crisis for the entire industry. And I think what you have right now, because there's a lack of conversation, like really true, honest, and deep conversation going on, the people that are closer to we don't trust police, we don't like police, they are being far more easily influenced into we just downright hate the police. And the actions that we've seen going on without interrupt, and that means that some of the marches, some of the demonstrations, some of the, not the peaceful protests, but the violent protests, they're allowed to control the conversation because there is no contrary conversation going on. Police leadership just isn't, in my opinion, stepping up enough to say, here's the facts, here's the realities, let's move on, address these issues, and work together between the community and the police to fix the problem that we have before us right now.
You're absolutely right. It's not, we are lacking a leadership within the policing industry right now to step up and to do stuff. And I mean, I think that actually, I guess I could ask you all individually, but I know that, for example, Mountain View PD, you guys know what you're doing when it comes to social, when it comes to communicating prior to a crisis or an emergency, in a crisis or emergency, but not every police agency is as advanced in those communications tactics and crisis preparation strategies as you guys are. So and I think that it's not just about social media, but social media right now is where we're seeing where the conversation is being had across the country. So if it's happening in local communities, it's also happening online, and those local communities are speaking with people on the other side of the country in their local communities. So what are some, I don't know, I guess it's too big of a question and to start talking about what police agencies should be doing, because we hear that left, right, and center, and yet they're still not. But I guess what are some obstacles that, is it still fear? Is it still, inner workings of inner obstacles to understand and get online, or to understand how to share those stories? And actually, who was it? Lou and Tim. Chris, I'm not sure if you were part of it, or at least I didn't see you. You guys just had that ThinkLE hashtag going on Twitter. It was a brilliant conversation.
Yeah, Melissa,
Tim.
Go
Sorry.
ahead.
And I was a bit of a latecomer to it. Lou was right there from the beginning. And that was just a conversation that blossomed literally out of somebody asking a question. And it was a tough question that was asked, and it was answered. And that blossomed into a lot of really great points being made in regards to what policing is doing, what it's lacking in. And I think when you look at some of the points about leadership right now, when you have people that are not in a position of formal leadership by rank per se, but they're stepping up and saying, here's what the issues are. Here's what we need to do to address them. Here's issues regarding training that have to be put in place and implemented. There's such a void for that leadership that even a slight voice right now is really respected, really looked up towards, because people are dying for that leadership to step up. And I think about what the chief in Richmond, California did when he stood with the protesters and the hashtag Black Lives Matter poster, or the chief of Milwaukee shooting right from the heart, saying this is what's hurt his community and this is what his community needs. The public just gravitated to it because they were so in desperate need of the leadership in that space to come out and take a strong stand. The trickle-down effect is that the rank and file, they have now messages that they can work with and that they can use, and they can share a lot easier in the public space. And I think hashtag ThinkLE really personified that. Lou?
I've found that what's going on with the attacks on the police, specifically in social, I'm talking about reputation attacks, not physical attacks, is that it's causing law enforcement to back into a corner. And what's happening is it's really polarizing, is that it's driving this wedge. It's creating more of an us versus them. And so the conversations that some of the police are having, or if they're trying to interject themselves into the discussion, is coming from a built camp. And I really hate building camp, because it forces us to see the other side as an opponent. Versus what I wanted to do with the ThinkLE hashtag was, all right, this is going to be based on finding common ground. Where do we agree? And let's branch off from there. Because if we can't find any common ground, if we're not going to commit ourselves to intelligent conversation that's built on facts, science, understanding, law, those basic core elements, then we're not going to go anywhere. And the challenge is that when you are an insider in policing and you admit that we have problems, that you air some dirty laundry, that you say, yeah, we have some cracks in our culture, then it's seen as being a sellout. It's being seen as being a traitor. So we need some folks to step up and say, yes, we recognize some of the problems here. Let's find out where we agree and how we can address some of these small problems. They're not nearly as big as what some of our critics are making them out to be. So I'm asking, it's not like a complete police reform. It's not like an overhaul. It's just a little bit of patchwork that needs to get done.
I agree on many different levels. And I love that I like everything that you just said, but you said that I'm saying we, but you can't, police officers, police agencies can't, or law enforcement, I should say, can't see the situation or can't see the community or the people as the opponents. And I think that mindset is a really, really good place to start.
Well, and Melissa, if I could go ahead.
I'll finish up quick, Chris. I was teaching a couple of use of force classes within the last week, and the general consensus is we need to educate the public, and it's as if they need to change. And I'm saying, no, the challenge is for us to change also, and that's a really hard message that says we can do better. So that's part of that common ground is both of the sides of us versus them need to start meeting in the middle. We as police officers need to make concessions to what the public wants from us. And cops don't like being told that.
The words of a leader, that's exactly, in my opinion, what Tim is saying, or we need law enforcement to stand up and communicate those exact words publicly to both sides and hopefully find a way to meet in the middle. I know, Chris, you wanted to add to that.
Sure. Just kind of on the same theme as what Lou and Tim have said. One of the things as we have gone around the country kind of talking to different groups and conferences that we say that, Mountain View PD does that's a little bit different is a lot of times we get asked about, well, what about negative comments on all of your social channels? Because the 99% of the questions from chiefs and command staff are like, can we block them? Can we remove them? If you were to look at Mountain View PD's digital channels, you would actually see that we very rarely block anything. And the purpose behind that is we feel strongly that it's a forum, and we understand that we may not agree or people may not agree with us. But we want them to feel comfortable to have that conversation take place on our pages. And this includes profanity. This includes people who are really irate. And we will dialogue with them because we don't see this as very different than a city council meeting where someone has their constitutional rights to stand up and voice their opinion. What's going to upset someone the most is if, you're physically at that council meeting and you either plug your ears or you turn around and walk out or you mute them, right? If you take away someone's voice and you take away the ability for them to be heard, you're just going to infuriate the whole issue and lose all rational sense to have any discussion. Take the other side of it, though, is if you stand there and you listen and you try to actively listen and respond in a professional manner, make the other people know they're heard. I think those are the first building blocks, the first steps towards a successful dialogue for whatever the issue at hand is.
Excellent point. And when you make that analogy of the community council to whoever you're training or whoever you're working with, the other members of law enforcement or police agencies, do you see the light bulb go off in their mind or that aha moment? Do they still have resistance? Because it's a hard thing to receive criticism, especially when it's public.
It is, and we still see that. I was in that camp too when we first started going down the social media path, and I know Shino Tanaka, who is our social media coordinator. It took some convincing on her end to tell me this different approach, but once she explained it, it made complete sense because if you put yourself in the residents' eyes and they're trying to voice a frustration, they've had a negative contact with the cops, and if they're just being ignored, you're going to create even more enemies. But a lot of people, they just want to vent. And when they know that they've been heard, and we give them the option to come in, and we've done this, we have met them face to face and really tried to hear them out and explain things, you actually turn around and you gain advocates for life. You gain people in the community who have their own circles of influence who will then go and, in a sense, be your champions. And they will, talk to their peer groups and say, you know what, Mountain View PD is a little bit different. They're transparent. They've heard us out. we might not agree, but we're going to agree to disagree, and that's okay. In our eyes, we still consider them a professional organization.
Tim, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, and right along what Captain Hsiung was saying is not only does that influence those people that you're having that conversation with, agree or disagree, but all the public that sees that same conversation going on, they also see that same thing happen. Those people, they might be moderates, they might be sitting on the fence of how they really feel, but they take it away. It really does have a blossoming effect on everybody that can see those conversations happen and to see that you're really, really trying. Now, I don't think that the captain's referring to like trolls that just want to come on and hate and really just do nothing but be, disingenuous with the conversation. But those people that really just need to see a different point of view or to be given the other side of the objective, I think they really take away from agree or disagree that at least attempt at the conversation. And it goes such a long way to influencing everybody that's in that sphere.
Absolutely. Lou, did you have something that you wanted to add on your side of this? I know we're talking social, but perhaps, what you're seeing offline on the streets in relation to all of this.
Well, I have a different perspective on the social side of this in that I speak from a platform from a consulting company. So yes, I'm a police officer, but on the side, I'm able to operate under another banner. So I can speak. I have a little bit longer leash to be able to talk about the issues without having to worry about some of the conflicts between, my duties as a government official versus that of a business person. So what I speak from a business person's platform that has the police experience. And I'm able to engage those in a little bit different manners, that I'm not limited to my geographic area. I'm able to reach out. A lot of the journalists that are online have reached out to me about different posts that I put online that have, given me a reputation that says he's willing to air out some of the laundry and talk about some of the solutions and not dig his heels in the defense of police. So I'm very fortunate that I have this public forum, being social media, to be able to put some of that out and try to be as accessible as possible to talk about things. One of the examples I'll throw out there is that when I see journalists confusing terminology, one of cops' biggest pet peeves is the confusion between a robbery and a burglary. They're two totally separate crimes, but they're often misinterchanged in the public. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing terms like homicide, murder, manslaughter, kill, or died, all being used interchangeably. That they don't mean the same thing. And we're glomming onto some of these words. So when we have the discussion about something as simple as, I think that word is unfair, all of a sudden we can totally change the tone of somebody's message if they get a better understanding of what that word means. It incites a different emotional response. Because I've said it before, you can't trump emotion with facts and logic. You have to meet emotion with emotion. So when we're using the right words and the right terminology, that has a drastic effect on others and how they perceive the issue.
Absolutely. And I love that you just said that, because it's very true. And what we're seeing happen right now on the public side of things, it's extremely profoundly emotional. So when, for the police agencies or PIOs that might be tuning in right now and listening, it's not just about the answer isn't just about communicating facts, communicating, particular messaging. It's finding stories, for example, to wrap that messaging in. Stories that are relatable, stories that are human, that have that human emotion, that human appeal, that will connect with your audience on a level more profound than simple facts will. So that's an important point. Thank you for bringing that up and including that. There's one thing, actually, because you just brought up your blog, Lou, which I'm a huge fan of. I love that you ask the hard questions, that you lay it out. I always learn so much from your perspective and from your experience, and you tell it all, just like I just said, in storytelling, which just captivates the reader. And you recently wrote a blog post that highlight, well, that was, what was it called? It was called No Win Policing. So I thought it was so timely and so, I know Tim's going to kill me, but it was so human. It was so relatable, I can say. Can you talk a little bit about, just for the non-police officers who are listening in right now, I'd love for you to just detail a little bit of the standards other than law that police are held to. And I think that this is a big misperception. There's a lack of communication and understanding on the other side, on the public side of things, when it comes to the standards that police officers are held to. So could you just touch on that quickly for us?
Sure, but first I'm going to say I agree with Tim. The word is relatable.
Yeah, I'll give you both it.
Sure. You know, what's really troublesome right now is that the standard that these cases nationally are being judged by is that of law. And to me, law, if it were to be given a grade on policing, is like D- level policing. It passes, but we can do a whole lot better. And that's really hurtful when cops hear that. They're like, well, what do you mean? It's lawful. That's the standard. Like, no, that's the standard that, you know, that keeps you out of jail, right? That keeps you from being found civilly liable. So what we have is we've got one standard, which is law. And, you know, there's criminal law and civil law, which are different. There's different standards. There's different burdens. There's different ways that those things are evaluated. Another standard is departmental policy. Departmental policy does not have to do with law. Yeah, sure, they have to be in compliance with law, but there could be other standards. Like a chokehold, there's very few areas that have a legal ban on chokehold. It's a policy issue. Then there's also, of course, like the moral and ethical standards, which is what allows a police officer to go to sleep at night knowing that he did something. And then how the public perceives it, how the community accepts that. So there's all these different groups that use different standards to judge us, to evaluate what we're doing. And when we put it only on law, we're doing ourselves a huge disservice. We're saying, no, grade D- is good enough. No, that's where we should be starting. That's like the first filter that we go through. There's so many more things that we should be striving for. We want to do things that are acceptable to the community. We want to do things that we can live with personally and go to bed with a clear conscience. So it's more than just law.
I think that's important for people to realize, and I think it's very important to hear from a police officer that says, I want to do things, I want to do my job so that I can go to sleep at night. And that for those who actually haven't, or maybe tuning in for the first time and don't know you, Lou, I learned a lot, even just in our discussion in the previous podcast that we recorded together, on how much that is one of your key goals every day when you're walking the beat with your baton, swirling your baton. And I think that's one of the things, and maybe that's why I like the word humanize, because it's not just making you relatable, it's showing that you are human behind, okay, maybe human when you say it like that isn't the right term, but behind the badge, behind the uniform, which right now has very negative stigma, and hopefully we'll start to see that reshape and turn the other way. But I think that a lot of people in the public who are very infuriated right now with what's going on across the country and with the results that we're seeing, they don't realize that. I think there's a lot there that isn't being communicated, and it is through those stories, and it is through that relatability and is one of the areas of focus that I believe law enforcement should be focusing on, is communicating that this is not, at the end of the day, it is not a death that you're looking for. That's not the end result that you want to achieve no matter what. And the other thing is, and I think it's a big point, and Lou, you've brought it up a couple times, is the lack of training. I think that has a lot to do with it too. And I think that the first step there is, like you said, coming forward and for law enforcement as a in general to come forward and say, okay, yes, there's a lack of training here. What can we do about this? And what will we do about this starting today? Here's what we're going to do, A, B, C, X, Y, Z moving forward. Do you guys have anything to add to all of this?
I would sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I was just going to add that on the relatable, humanizing note, it would be, the various social channels provide a great venue for this. Whether it's a podcast, whether it's a post, we've looked at our analytics and we see that the posts that we talk about, beyond just the badge, but the officers, why they became officers, what they enjoy serving. The podcast for our department was even educational for me as an administrator because I heard sides of our officers that were interviewed that I never knew about. Why they're passionate about riding a motorcycle, what made them want to become a cop. It's so interesting to hear it just from that perspective that you can't do anything but walk away and go, you know what? Wow, these are mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles that work for this police department. And like Tim said in the beginning, the Robert Peel principles, the police are the people and the people are the police. When you have that kind of messaging coming out and you tell those stories over and over through whatever channels your department decides on, that's way more effective than posting a crime blotter every day or putting up wanted pictures. There's a time and place for that. But if your content on your social channels only speaks to those types of things, it actually almost perpetuates the Hollywood-esque persona or stereotype that officers have.
Excellent addition. Tim, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say that what we're really going around in circles about here, and when Lou talks about training and what Chris is talking about, reaching out to the community and building that community, is it all boils down to the same thing. It's always just basic communication skills. When we look at, I won't say that what happened in Ferguson could have been avoided with communication between the two people involved there, but post-event, there was a definite lack of communication that had occurred between the police, the media, and the public. And that because of that void, falsehoods, rumors, innuendo, they were allowed to take root. When you look at the Eric Garner situation in New York City, a step back from the have to get the arrest, have to get the handcuffs on, have to get the person in control, communication again, take another step, take another opportunity to talk a little bit longer. Maybe we look at a different situation there. Berkeley, with what we saw going on there, again, it was always coming down to communications lacking. And whether you're doing it in real life, face-to-face, on the street, walking the beat, or whether it's in the social media space, communication is the most important factor that has to be brought into all of this at all times. Go to the next step when we're going to talk about purely social media. There's a serious lack of training that I know Chris and Lou and Melissa, you guys are all working really hard at getting the training component out there and getting officers to understand how these tools work, what the benefit is, what the possible pitfalls and downfalls for them can be. And it just keeps on coming around and around to the same thing, that this policing is a dirty business. It's a rough business, but we have to take some time once in a while just to sit back and have some real honest conversations.
I agree. These real honest conversations, if they could be held across the nation, and I'm going to say across North America, because we're seeing more and more things in Canada as well with police officers and different obstacles and the things that are coming out. So across North America, at least to begin with, is to have these real, honest conversations publicly. So with the communities, as well as internally. And, you're dead on, Tim. Everything, whenever I'm training an organization about crisis management or crisis prevention, crisis prep, whatever angle of crisis I'm training on, or I'm teaching on, or I'm helping on, it all comes down to communication as well as actual doing. So whatever you communicate, you actually have to follow through with action. And a lack of communication, as we've seen, starting with Ferguson, is a huge, huge statement. It is an action within itself, and it's a very negative one. And then to add in what Lou's been saying about a lack of training, if we want to go to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we want to go to, so we're talking about communication once the crisis has occurred, but if we want to go to right before that crisis ever started, there might be a lack of training there that could have prevented the whole thing or the whole things, on a daily basis as a starting point. So crisis prevention, best form of crisis management. If you're in a crisis, you need to communicate. So I think that it's the two right now underlying themes that we keep seeing and that we keep seeing that we need to hear more of from police agencies, from law enforcement, and moving, both publicly and behind the scenes, moving towards taking actions to just better them.
Yeah, Melissa, it's Lou.
Go ahead.
I'll touch on the training side of this, specifically like operational training, like how we actually act in the field. And so many times we find that we're being attacked on how officers perceive risk. So we don't really push a risk management kind of mindset to our officers. And that I've talked about risk having basic components of the time or the urgency on one side. Another dimension of it is the consequences or the importance of it, of how bad things can possibly get. And then the third component being what's the potential or the frequency. So like what are really the chances of happening? And what we're being attacked on can really be wrapped up in one of those components, and say officers are exaggerating what the dangers are. They're exaggerating how urgent the situation is. They're exaggerating what the potential of that happening is. And I find that officers are falling back on just how bad it could get. And they see that and they hinge everything based off of, well, they could have a gun under the seat. Well, they could do this. They could do that. Yeah, it could be anything, but can you articulate it? Can you actually point to a specific factor? Can you describe the body language, not just say the person looked nervous? Can you describe this? Can you relate what you saw into a real danger, a real threat, a real potential, a real sense of urgency? And to me, it's about training risk management and looking at things from science, from research, from past history, and not just well, it could happen, it might be there. And that's one of the first things that we need to discuss before we talk about any of the other operational training things, is that we are risk managers. And we operate with a lot of risk, and you have to accept it. You have to allow for some risk. That's why we got into the business, because there's the element of risk. I mean, that's why so many cops go skydiving and drive fast motorcycles and take on all these other risky hobbies. But then in your own job, you say, I'm not going to accept any risk. I'm going to do whatever I possibly can. When in fact, some of the officers' actions are actually in conflict with that. They actually increase the risk. So we need to hold our officers accountable as risk managers.
I think I like that. Tim, Chris, do you guys have anything you want to
add? Just from the management perspective, over and over again, and it really goes to Lou's point, which is, we hear kind of the cliche phrases of, I felt my life was in danger, et cetera, et cetera. And that is not at all to take away from what that officer was feeling. But Lou's point is spot on, is that we need to do a better job industry-wide of training and explaining and documenting and showing those types of threat. Because, I think absent that type of training, it's almost Hollywood takes over and fills the gap, both for the officers and for the public on why a cop pulled a trigger. And if it's Hollywood writing that script, we're in a lot of trouble. And I think industry-wide, it really goes to show that, we need to really articulate the thought process, all those different things, instead of using just a catchphrase that really, doesn't explain a whole lot.
It's profound, and it's hopefully the right people will tune in, and hear this, because we really are starting to talk about beginning steps to moving forward and turning this around, and what's involved, what that looks like. I have 2 questions that I'd love to ask each of you, but before I do, Tim, is there something that you wanted to add to this awesome bit of the conversation? Go ahead.
I was thinking along the lines of what Chris was just saying, that you see some of the responses that police officers have had online, and it completely justified frustration on their parts, that they feel like they are really being targeted, beaten down, challenged at every turn. And when that sets in, they start responding online with an emotional, combative response, and they'll go into the things that the general public just doesn't have to see or have to do, whether it's fighting with a meth head with a weapon, or looking down the wrong end of a gun, trying to arrest somebody and then being attacked by that person's partner. Those situations, they are real. There's no doubt about that. The vast majority of the public never sees it, never has to deal with it. But then the vast majority of police officers, they don't deal with it on an ongoing 24-hour-a-day basis. There's a lot of really good moments within policing, the thank yous, the pats on the backs, the helping kids, the we'll say it, the boring and mundane stuff as well. Those all occur. So when police start amping it up in the online social space to try to clear a point and to argument it, they're making themselves out to be that Hollywood ideal, which is like Captain Hsiung said, like, that's just not reality. And I think we go right back to how we can really bring the conversation down to both sides meeting it and having a better understanding of each other.
Amazing point. So let me ask you each 2 questions. We'll start with the first one. And I know that, they're questions that we've been talking about, but if we had to narrow it down, I think that it might be an exercise worth doing. So first question is, if we here today, or if you here today want to communicate one thing with the general public, what would that be in relation to everything that we've been discussing? So I'd love to hear each of what you would want to communicate to the public.
From my end, this is Chris. I would say tell your story. I don't know if you want me to expand on that, but the police departments across the nation have an awesome story to tell about day-to-day things that they do, helping people, and those stories need to be told, and told often.
I agree. Lou?
I would relate to the public that there are a lot of us that want to talk about the issues. And when you see us on the street, ask us about them. Tell us what's on your mind. And I tell officers, hey, these conversations are being had, whether you involve yourself in them or you close your ears to them or not. And we need to open ourselves up and become available. So to all of you in the public side of this, is that we want to talk. We want to share our experiences. We want to tell you what our sides are so you understand who we are and why we do what we do. So please come seek us out, whether it be on the social channels, whether it be face-to-face on the train platform or the sidewalk or wherever you find us. Come find an officer and talk and ask. But do so with the right intention of finding common ground. It's no conversation will ever go well when it's accusatory or when it's aggressive. Is that if you really want to get to the issues, just ask, bring it up, and talk about it.
I love that call to action. Tim?
From the public standpoint, you have to understand that the way police are trained is to make sure they position themselves every day to go home at the end of their shift and to get the job done. And sometimes that's going to mean that there's aggressive actions, there's arrests that have to be made, there's lawful authorities that have to be exercised. There's no police officer that's worth their weight in gold that goes out looking for a fight or a confrontation or to get into a punch-up. It's the exact opposite. The police just want to get through the day and do their job with as minimal problems as possible. So to the public, I would say just listen for a second. You will have your point you need to make, but if you just give it a second, relax, and listen, the police will be more than generous with their time to explain how things are all going to work for them. On the other side, to the police, the exact same advice holds true. You really have to get into active listening to the public. There's been so many times I've seen a video where a police officer is yelling, "Stop resisting," but at the same time, they're punching and punching and punching, never giving that opportunity to the person to stop resisting. At some point in time, if there's going to be action, there has to be a pause. If there's going to be conversation, there has to be a pause. And that's to allow for the listening, allow for the counteraction to take place. And that's really what it comes down to, is if you just take the time with each other, you'll find that it's going to be a much better situation for everybody involved.
I like it, and well, absolutely. And it actually brings to my second question, was the flip side of that. So what would you want to communicate with other police agencies, other police officers? And, Tim, earlier, I don't know if it was, well, I know we've said it today. I know we've also communicated it via email in the past few days. But one of the biggest things that we're lacking, like you said earlier, is a show of leadership. Some people within law enforcement to rise up and take the lead and start to bring this entire negative and declining situation and flip it around, or at least start to flip it around and start to lessen the divide between community and police. So I was going to shape this question of what do we want to communicate to leaders within police agencies, but I think that I don't want to say leaders and for the preconceived notion or the, for it to be taken as I'm talking with, only, for example, captains of police departments or only PIOs. I consider, Lou, you're a police officer, you're on the streets every day doing your job. You are by far a leader within law enforcement via all the channels that you communicate on, but most importantly with the messaging and the questions and the things that you're communicating. So I just kind of want to make that clear, that I'm not just asking to, just that anybody who feels that they can rise up and lead through this in collaboration with other leaders in law enforcement absolutely should. So that said, I'm going to shut my mouth now and ask the question. So what do you guys want to communicate with other police agencies or police officers, in regards to moving forward?
In terms of the leadership issue and the aspect, it doesn't matter on the rank. It doesn't matter on the person's position or how long they've been on. But there is a severe lack of real leadership and real honesty coming out of the conversations that have been going on. And that's been going on for decades. There is a void there that has to be filled, and almost anybody that is really strong can step into that void and take it. What I'm going to suggest to leaders in general is you have to be empathetic, but you also have to be honest with it. We understand exactly how the public feels, and we understand the frustration, and we understand that there's a reason that's caused this. But the facts are the facts, and lay straight out exactly how this job works and exactly what legal authorities are and how they work, but do it in such a way, not from a position of authority, but a position of understanding, a position of empathy, a position of let's work together to get beyond this. But they have to be a strong voice in it. And I think how easily it would have been for, and we'll say the misinformation that came out of Ferguson that caused the eruption, once we saw what the grand jury saw, once we had all the information, there wasn't really any leadership to stand up and say, hold on, you're absolutely wrong in how this has been perceived. You're absolutely wrong in what caused this explosion to happen, but it did happen. So let's look at the facts and let's now address the underlying issue. The way the underlying issue was addressed was, try to put the water on the fire. And sometimes that's not going to work. You're going to have to let some things burn out and take their time and really get an understanding of how it's working and what's fueling it.
Well said. And, you starting this statement, you said that, this is an issue that's been going on for many, 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 many years. But that's now because of that, we've reached where we are. So it's time for change. That's all I wanted to add in. Chris?
I would say that just get the message across to all police departments and their staff that policing as we know it has changed. And this discussion, this podcast has already outlined a number of reasons why, but it has changed. And now as leaders in each agency, it is incumbent upon us to adapt and to train up and educate our staffs, our line level staff, our dispatchers, our records, our officers on the changing times. The agencies that can find themselves ahead of this curve will likely be successful in weathering this storm. Those that are not, it's going to be a tough road to try to gain back the trust of the community through traditional methods. It's almost like they're wanting to send a fax report, a press release out to the public when the public has no fax machines and they're not listening. It's a total disconnect. So, we understand now that the people that we police, the community has spoken, and we need to hear them, and we need to start those inroads to have those intelligent dialogues. But that can't happen. It may happen at a management level, but if your officers and your line level staff are not on the same page as you, it's just going to be an ugly revolving door.
Oh, such a strong point, and something that everybody really needs to hear. Chris, that advice is superb. And for the agencies or the police departments out there that just aren't prepared for that, or maybe don't believe in it, or it's really time to realize that there is a change. The change has happened, and it's time to get on board, and it's time to work collectively together as an industry as a whole, so that as an industry as a whole across the country, you can start to move forward and absolutely change the direction of this crisis. Lou?
We need to look at what resources are available within the law enforcement agencies to craft intelligent responses to the concerns. There's so many different... all these incidents have been the intersection of so many different problems. And all of a sudden, these things collide, and there's the crisis. And you're looking at things like human performance factors. You're dealing, there's an organization called Force Science that deals with human behavior in times of stress, things that are dealing with hormonal responses. You're dealing with factors of time and reaction and perception and memory recall. And we need somebody on our staffs that have a deep understanding of that, which then gets coupled up with this mental health awareness and response and how to communicate. There's, it shouldn't be just one person on your staff. It's like, if you respond to any 911 call, you need to have an understanding of mental health. I mean, there's statistics that say between 50 and 80% of police force involves somebody in a mental health crisis. So if it's pretty predictable, then we need to be looking at having that response, which also factors into just the larger issue of police strategy. And we need to be having the discussion of strategy way above law. Like I said before, law is like the starting point. It's like the lowest level standard that we should be holding ourselves to. Because what ends up coming up is then something like the race conversation, the black versus the white versus the brown versus the whatever color is out there. And got to have conversations, and that part of that comes down to community policing as a philosophy instead of being a program or a position. I don't hold the position of community policing officer, but guess what? I'm in the community more than the officers that are in those positions. I'm not the media relations guy or the public information, but I share information with the public more than the guy that holds that office. So we need to embrace it as a philosophy. So on one side, it's the relationship of the community policing, but on the other side is understanding the content of things like Force Science, the mental health awareness, and the strategizing these incidents to be able to craft intelligent responses to the questions, to have real answers, not just something that's made up, not something that we're going to look into, not something that's based on myth or tradition, but something that's based on science, research, fact, and history. That's the message I want to craft to law enforcement agencies, administrators, and officers.
Such an important message. Thank you so much. Thank you to all three of you for taking the time to have this conversation with me. It's such an important conversation. And I think that I was right. The three of you together to talk about this is just so complimentary and so informative and insightful for everybody listening. So really thank you. Before I ask you each to share where everybody can find and follow you, if they want more information, if they want to get in touch with you, is there anything that you feel that you want to add that we didn't talk about or that I didn't ask, or just in response to everything that you've all just said?
I think I want to thank you, Melissa, for allowing us this opportunity to bring this conversation to the forefront and in such a way that it can be shared and we can get this message going out. And I think this is the beginning of really what it all takes, is to get people talking about these issues, to show that it's not a scary world. It's not a place to be afraid to go, that this is actually where we can really see some change and some real honest conversation take place.
Absolutely. And it's time. It is time. All right. So if nobody else wants to add anything, please let everybody know, each of you, where they can go for more information on what you do, how you do it, if they want to get in touch, if they want to follow you guys online. Where do we go?
Melissa, this is Lou. I hope that this is just the start of continued conversations. And because your listeners come from all over, come find me on Twitter. Start with the hashtag ThinkLE. So think law enforcement. But then also my handle on Twitter is The Virtus Group. THEVIRTUS Group. And let's start having some of these conversations. We're going to meet in the middle, and I engage all sorts of attacks and questions and concerns and comments. So please, if you're listening, bring it on.
Awesome. Chris?
Over here in Mountain View, we are more than happy and quite passionate about spreading the word about social media with law enforcement. I can be reached on Twitter at CHMTNVIEWPD, and anything you need to know about Mountain View PD can be found at mountainviewpoliceblog.com.
Awesome. Tim?
You can find me on Twitter is probably the easiest place. It's T_Burrows. On every Wednesday night at 9 p.m., I can be found on Twitter having this conversation, or a very similar styled conversation, under the hashtag CopChat, 9 p.m. Eastern time, where we invite the public and the community, the community and the police to talk online in an open forum about lots of different subjects.
Very, very cool. Thank you so much to all three of you for just taking the time to have this really important and really great discussion with me.
Thank you,
My
Melissa.
pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. I release a new episode every Sunday, so if you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to the Crisis Intelligence Podcast over on the Crisis Intelligence blog at agnesday.com/blog, or on iTunes or on Stitcher. And while you're at it, head on over to iTunes and Stitcher, and would really appreciate it if you left us a review and your feedback. You can also follow me on Twitter at Melissa_Agnes. And if you'd like to reach out to me to ask me a follow-up question from this week or a past podcast, or if you'd like to discuss the possibility of having me come and speak at an upcoming event, then you could email me directly at magnes@agnesday.com. Thanks so much for tuning in this week, and I look forward to talking even more crisis intelligence with you next Sunday.